Welcome to the Successful Life podcast. I'm your host, Corey Berrier, and today I'm going to do a little follow up on last week's discussion on fear of rejection and imposter syndrome. So I realized after I did the episode last week that I didn't give you really any way of overcoming that thing or how I've overcome a lot of those things. And I think there's always a piece of those things that are always going to live in each and every one of us. At least for me, I think there is. And I think, as I've reflected back over this past week after doing last week's episode, I got to thinking about there's different levels of imposter syndrome, different levels of fear of rejection. And they show up differently. So, as an example, if I look back on some of the things that I've overcome in my life and some of the things that I've been through are challenges that, and by no means am I saying this like I've, arrived or anything like that, but a lot of the things that I've put myself through in my life, a lot of people don't come out of those things: drugs, alcohol, relationships, putting myself in really terrible positions, like I mentioned last week in Las Vegas and in the other Corey's nasty house. And so I think about what it took to get through those things, going away to rehab for 6 months and being away from, the woman I was seeing and being in a camp of men for 6 months, which I couldn't leave the property, and it was a Pentecostal holiness uh, recovery center, if you will. There was no, they didn't look at they didn't look at recovery the way I look at recovery now. There was no 12 steps, there was no framework. It was Pentecostal holiness, show up, and God, it was God fearing. I mean, I remember the preacher would just look at you and make you feel so guilty for not going up to the altar. I mean, he would look directly at you and just say, like, what are you not repenting for, or whatever. It's been a long time ago, so I can't remember specifically what he said, but it was this guilt ridden, fearful way of preaching. And quite frankly, it it kind of ruined my organized religion thoughts. You know, I don't I don't buy into organized religion. I don't like it. It doesn't align with me. I don't go to church because it's just not my cup of tea. If it's your cup of tea, more power to you. I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. I'm just saying it doesn't work for me. And my brother is he is an ordained minister, and he doesn't preach that way, and he's not in it for the wrong reasons. And there's not too many people I know. Not that I know a bunch of preachers, but it does seem like there's a financial aspect to that. And my little brother didn't have that for sure. But back to the fear of rejection and the things that imposter syndrome, I think about, the things that I was most fearful for or most fearful of were those situations that I put myself in because I was intoxicated. The DUIs, the getting in trouble with drugs, the, putting myself in positions where I could ultimately been killed. minimum. And I think about, the times that I got through where I was terrified. I was scared to death. And one of those times was for sure in that 6 month, work camp that I was in. And I was court ordered because I'd got in trouble with drugs. And my alternative was I could go to prison for 35 to 42 months. And that just wasn't an option for me. I mean, it was an option, but it wasn't one I was going to exercise. I can tell you that. And so I decided to go for the lesser of the two evils and go to this 6 month camp. The problem, or the thing was, is they knew I was court ordered there. So the folks that were court ordered got treated a little bit differently. And ultimately, because they knew I needed to be there or that I was court ordered to be there, I didn't, the, again, was treated with a very different, treated very differently. And so I had to people please and I had to make sure I was liked by everyone. And I've talked about masks on here, and boy, in that place, I had to have 40 different masks. I had a God fearing, you know, repentant mask on in church. I had to be cool in front of the guys that were cool. I had to be, tough in front of the guys that were tough. I had to be able to communicate with the guys that were, this place was like the last stop for a lot of folks, including me in that situation. But there were some hardcore dudes in there, people that had countless felony charges sitting on there, waiting for the cop or the cops to come and serve them their charges or warrants or whatever. And so they came to this place because it was an attempt to mitigate those charges. And so I was around a bunch of wild ass dudes. I mean, you're talking about people that are coming in off the street that have been smoking methamphetamines and crack cocaine. And I mean, like the second before they got in was when they hit the crack pipe. So you're dealing with people with untreated bipolar disorder, untreated schizophrenia. Like these are not people you really want to be around. And so I had to people please and I had to, because I didn't want to get rejected out of that place. And I felt like if I ever spoke up, I would be rejected. I felt like if I, or, and ejected. So I just kind of played good. I played the part with whoever I was in front of. And that's been a lot of my life is I just play the part of who the person I'm in front of. And whether that's, in a relationship or whether that's with a past boss or whether that's been with even friends or people at the bar or, the list goes on and on. This is something I've struggled with a lot of my life. And it's because I wanted people's approval. I wanted them to like me. And the truth of the matter is, I just didn't feel like I was good enough to be a part of. And so I've been doing a lot of work over these past few months to figure out what's the root of those things. And it's really just stories that we tell ourselves. And a lot of that stems from fear of rejection and the reason, that imposter syndrome, I believe, manifests is because I've, had to play the part of different people all my life because of that fear of rejection. And so let's take this in a different direction. I mentioned I can tell fear of rejection in salespeople, and I mean, I can see it a mile away. And the way, because I've been that guy, and the way I've overcome that is I have to realize when a customer or a client or my boss or whoever doesn't do the thing I want them to do, it's not the outcome that I want. The truth is, they're just not doing it my way. And the other hard truth is, people are not going to do it my way. While my way seems like it may be the right way, I have to be open minded to it not being the right way. And so that fear of rejection in a sales situation, very rarely am I affected by the fear of rejection in a sales situation because I don't know what's going on with that person unless I ask enough questions. I don't know what's going on in their personal life. And sometimes you can't ask those questions, but you can pick up and you can sense when people have something more going on than they're telling you. If you watch their body language or their facial expressions or how they interact with you, if they're open and kind, that might just mean they're using that as a people pleasing method so you go away. And so sometimes you have to ask the hard questions in those situations. It doesn't mean you need to be a jerk by any stretch because that's never appropriate. But what is appropriate is figuring out, if you're in plumbing or HVAC and you're at a customer's house, they have a problem. They didn't wake up that day and call you because they had nothing better to do. They didn't call you because they like seeing your company van in their driveway. In fact, you're the last person they wanted to call. And so you got to figure out why you're there, what the problem is. And you can only do that through being kind and listening to what they say, reading those facial expressions and the body language, then understanding how you can solve their problem. And it's much like that in life, when you've had a disagreement with someone or people are not acting the way you think they should act, there's a reason for that. Maybe your expectations are unreasonable, or maybe they have something going on that they're not telling you, and it's your job to figure that out. And I've also found that I sometimes, lots of times, put unreasonable expectations on myself. I don't know if you have ever said to yourself, hey, that was really a stupid move. You could have done this better. You could have done this different. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? And it's this constant barrage of, beating the shit out of yourself. You're the only one doing it. Most of the time we would not talk to another friend the way we talk to ourselves. And that self talk can be damaging. It can be detrimental to that fear of rejection and that imposter syndrome. It can, that's a self fulfilling prophecy when you start talking shit to yourself and you beat yourself up over things that are just not in your control and they're not your fault most of the time. I'm not saying that you don't have a part, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't take accountability because you 100% should. You have a part in everything, but you're not the whole part. You're not the whole piece of the puzzle. You're just a part of it. And it doesn't do you any good to berate yourself after you've lost a sale or after you've said something stupid to your girlfriend or your wife. But it does pay off, to make amends and to say, hey, I was wrong in this situation. Not I was wrong and you were wrong, but I was wrong in this situation. It could be how I handled it, it could be how I reacted, it could be how I interpreted the conversation, which could have been wrong. And so sometimes you have to ask clarifying questions. Did you mean to say it this way? Well, no, I didn't mean to say it this way. Is that how you took it? That's how I took it. Well, no, no, I didn't mean that at all. Right. So just a simple conversation sometimes can solve so many problems. And the problem is people don't communicate today. We communicate through text message, we communicate through, we see people on social media and we think that's the facts, right? We think that uh, when we see people acting crazy online, that that's the real person. And really, they may have just had a really crappy day that day. And maybe they just decided to say something crazy on social media and now you think they're crazy. On the other hand, you got to think about before you say stupid stuff because people can perceive you in that same light. And so I think all of these things contribute to how we see ourselves and how we look at us as people. And a lot of times we don't look at ourselves in a very positive light, and that's damaging. And it doesn't build your self-confidence. It doesn't build your character. Or if it does, sometimes it builds a negative character, and that's not really what you want, I don't believe. It's not what I want. I don't want people to look or hear anything that I say and think that guy's a real jerk or that guy's an egomaniac. And so I go back and I listen to this podcast, after it comes out, because I like to hear how do I come across to the crowd? If I were listening to this, how would I come across? How would I sound? And sometimes I don't like what I hear. Sometimes I think to myself, dude, what are you doing? And that's, that kicking my own ass. Like, why did you say it that way? Why did your voice inflect in that particular manner when you were talking about this thing? And it could just be that I'm passionate about it. It could be that I feel very strongly about it. And sometimes that may come across as being preachy or condescending. And so as it pertains to sales and your customers, you got to think about how your tonality is. You got to think about how you're coming across. And listen, it's, when you know you're right because you're the professional, it's real easy to slip into I'm the professional, you're an idiot, and what you're saying makes no sense, and you need to hear me because I'm the professional. And unfortunately, that doesn't work very well. Even if someone's wrong, sometimes you just got to let them keep talking. And sometimes they'll figure out on their own they're not making any sense. And sometimes you just have to be empathetic towards their I'm trying to think of the word here, towards their lack of information, their lack of ability to know what they're talking about because most people don't. But they can go on Chat GPT or Perplexity or whatever or Google and they can Google what they think is wrong with their air conditioner and then they're the expert. They think they can speak your language. And they can't speak your language. You're there. You're the expert. You're the guy that actually knows. So that in itself, if you deal with that that imposter syndrome, because this engineer is talking about all the mechanics of an HVAC system, and maybe you don't know the specifics of what he's talking about, you got to recognize, like, okay, this guy's an engineer. He probably does know more about the inner workings of this box than I do. He probably does ask very pointed questions because he wants to seem smart. And so let him ask those questions. And if you don't know the answer, the answer is, I don't know. I'll have to get back with you, or let me check into that. But don't ever try to, my advice would be don't ever try to, out talk someone who might know more than you. And, I use that engineer example because this has happened countless times in our industry. You run across that 1 out of 10 guy that's, he wants to know every single thing about how that machine works. And it's not, as a sales guy, it's not our job to know everything about the inner workings of that system. I mean, you need to know enough to have a conversation, but you're not an engineer. You're a HVAC salesperson or a plumbing salesperson or whatever kind of salesperson you are, and you're there to sell the job and be able to communicate that effectively so that person can make a decision on their own to move forward with you as soon as possible. And I think, back to the fear of rejection, at the end of the day, not everybody is your customer. Not everybody should do business with you. And the truth of the matter is, not everybody, you don't want everybody to do business with you because some people are not fun to do business with, no matter how kind and nice you are. No matter how many discounts you give them. In fact, those people that are requesting discount after discount after discount are going to continue being a pain in the neck. You can guarantee it. It happens all the time. And so when you have that fear of rejection crop up, when it's time to ask for the money, just remember, like, not everybody's your customer. And it is ultimately their decision whether they move forward with you or not. You can't do anything to control that situation as long as you show up and give it 110%. And I don't mean you try to sell your butt off. I mean, like, you educate that customer on why it makes the most sense to go with you, even at a higher price. And you'd be shocked how many times people will pay a higher price to go with a better company. You know, I hear people complain online about how companies are price gouging and how equipment's very expensive and how they're making so much money. And the truth is, you don't know how much money it costs to run a business. It's astronomical. Just looking at the van itself is going to cost you, um, the van itself just to get in the driveway costs $300 to $500. So if you go out on a zero call and walk away with a goose egg, that costs the company money. And I don't want to scare you to have that fear of rejection because sometimes you're going to have to walk away with a zero. It shouldn't be often, but it is going to have to happen at some point. And then you have to reflect back, what could I have done differently? What did I say that maybe could have changed the direction of this? And it could be how you're dressed. It could be your breath stinks. It could be that you are filthy. And sometimes you still have to show up filthy, but you should probably explain to the customer what you were doing before you got there so they don't think that you show up to work filthy. Now, if it's 8 o'clock in the morning, you should never be filthy going into work. You should never look like the garbage man does that comes by your house every week. you know and these small things build confidence in your sales process. They build confidence in you when you do the things that you're supposed to do. When you brush your teeth in the morning, when you put your uniform on and it's pressed and it looks nice and it's clean and your hair's fixed, you feel better, and so therefore you're going to sell better. It's the same thing if you're going on a date. You wouldn't show up on a date, surely to God, looking disgusting, looking disheveled. looking like you just rolled out of bed because you don't want that person to think that you're a slack ass. Well, work's no different. And I mean every day at work. I don't mean your first day at work. I mean your your thousandth day at work. That stuff should never change. And if you do the same thing the right way every day for 1,000 days, then that 1,001 is just going to be a normal day. You're just going to get up and you're going to brush your teeth and you're going to shower and you're going to be clean. And that's going to be it's going to become your new normal, opposed to your normal now being the other guy. You know, we get used to we get used to things, right? In other words, there's um if your goal is X number of dollars per day, you're probably going to get right to that goal and you're going to quit. Now, some people push past that goal and then they push past that goal. It's a game. And so that's how I've beat having that fear of rejection and imposter syndrome when it comes to, being in a sales role. It's going to be hard to be successful in sales if you have that. It's going to be hard to be successful in life if you have that. Because there's always going to be that little voice in the back of your head that says you're not good enough. You don't belong here. And you're going to deal with that for probably the rest of your life. But that voice gets smaller and smaller and smaller. At least that's been my experience. Because repetition builds muscle, just like if you went to the gym. Repeating those positive habits create a positive person. If you want to be esteemable, you have to do esteemable things. You can't get self esteem by being a turd when you're not in front of people. You got to be the same guy, whether people are looking or not. And that's one of the things that, I'm the same guy. Doesn't matter if you're in front of me, if the boss is in front of me, if you're not in front of me, I'm the same dude. Doesn't matter because it's just easier being the same guy. And it's taken a lot of work to get there. And I can contribute a lot of that to being in recovery and having to go through some very hard and painful lessons in recovery. But those things have made me the person that I am today. And I am proud of those things. You know, not everybody gets it. And I don't know why that is. And I don't know why I don't know why I got it. And it doesn't mean I'll get it tomorrow, but it means today I have it. Because I've prayed, I've meditated, I've done my breathing exercises, I've went to the gym, I've made my phone calls. It's the consistent things in your life that really bring peace to you. And if you're looking for that or you're interested in that and you are struggling, just go back and re-listen to this because these are all my experience. I'm not telling you anything from a book. I'm not telling you anything that I haven't already done. And again, I haven't arrived. I'm not, this like, by no means am I a perfect example of how you should want to act. But I do try to set a good example as best I can. And I don't always do a great job, but I try to correct it if I don't. And so I think that's going to be about it for today. I appreciate you guys listening. The podcast drops every Friday at 4 a.m. And please, if you would, subscribe to the podcast. We've got about 50% people that have subscribed. If you're not one of them, please do. Leave us a review. That'd be great. I'd appreciate that. And we'll see you next Friday.